looking at Dylan making his morning coffee routine. I can't help but think how predictable he's gotten. Same expensive beans, same precise grinding, same little humming while he works. Morning. Beautiful. He says like clockwork. And honestly, it's sweet, but also kind of automatic at this point. I'm already scrolling through emails because the Morrison project isn't going to manage itself. And this promotion track requires actual focus. When we first met 3 years ago at that contractor expo, I thought we made perfect sense together. Me climbing the ladder at Henderson and Associates, one of the city's top architectural firms, and him running his own successful contracting business. We looked good together at company events. He cleaned up well in a suit, knew how to make conversation without embarrassing me, and his work ethic matched mine. Plus, he worshipped the ground I walked on, which didn't hurt. Dylan proposed after 18 months of dating, right there in my office, after hours when he brought me dinner during a late project deadline. Classic him, thoughtful, romantic, completely devoted. The wedding was everything I wanted, and honestly, married life suited me. He handled all the domestic stuff without being asked, brought me coffee every morning, surprised me with lunch deliveries when I was swamped. Having a husband who actually supported my career instead of competing with it felt like winning the lottery. The first real bump came about 6 months after we got married. I'd been working late on the Riverside development, genuinely working. By the way, and my phone died around 11. By the time I got home at 3 in the morning, Dylan was sitting in the living room looking like he'd been awake all night. "Where were you?" "I was worried sick," he said. And I explained about the deadline and the dead phone, but I could see something shift in his eyes, like he was filing away some mental note instead of just accepting my explanation. After that, he started asking more questions. Not accusations exactly, but this subtle probing that honestly got on my nerves. How was work? Who stayed late with you? Did you grab dinner? Just constant little check-ins that felt like surveillance disguised as caring. I started getting irritated by his need to know every detail of my day, especially when I was busting my ass trying to make senior associate. Then 9 months ago, everything changed when the firm hired Austin, fresh out of school, eager as hell, and honestly gorgeous in that young professional way that turns heads around the office. He was assigned to my team for the Henderson project. And from day one, I could tell he needed serious mentoring. The kid came from some rough background where nobody taught him how to navigate corporate environments. So naturally, I took him under my wing. Austin actually appreciated my expertise. When I explained complex design concepts, he listened like every word mattered. He asked thoughtful questions, stayed late to learn advanced techniques, made me feel like the accomplished professional I am instead of just someone's wife who happens to work. And okay, maybe I noticed he had this confidence that reminded me of Dylan when we first met, but that just made me better at understanding how to help him succeed. Dylan, meanwhile, kept up his devoted husband routine. Morning coffee, surprise office visits, little texts throughout the day checking in. Sweet, sure, but also kind of suffocating when I'm trying to focus on important shit. Austin and I started working later and later on projects, and I found myself actually looking forward to those evening sessions. Finally, someone who got excited about architecture the way I did, who wanted to learn everything I could teach him. The progression felt natural. Professional dinners to discuss project details, weekend office sessions when the building was quiet and we could really concentrate. Austin hanging on every word when I explained the politics of client management or the intricacies of structural engineering. He made me feel like a mentor worth having, someone with valuable knowledge to share. Dylan never suspected anything because why would he? I was working with a junior colleague, helping him develop his skills, being the kind of senior team member who actually gives a damn about bringing up the next generation. When I came home late, I had legitimate project deadlines to explain it. When I worked weekends, there were real deliverables that needed completion. Everything I told Dylan was technically true. I just didn't mention how much I enjoyed Austin's company or how our working relationship was developing into something more personal. The shift from mentoring to something else happened gradually. Austin started complimenting not just my professional skills, but my appearance, my intelligence, my way of handling difficult clients. He'd brush my hand when we looked at blueprints together, or stand just a little too close when reviewing computer screens. The attention felt incredible after months of Dylan treating me like comfortable furniture he could take for granted, and I started dressing more carefully for work, choosing outfits that Austin would notice. When he complimented my new dress or mentioned how professional I looked during client meetings, it gave me this rush that I'd forgotten existed. Dylan barely looked up from his phone when I walked into a room anymore. But Austin watched me like I was the most fascinating woman alive. The first time Austin kissed me, we were alone in the office on a Thursday evening, reviewing final drawings for the Morrison submission. He'd been asking about my college experience, how I'd navigated being a woman in a male-dominated field, and I was explaining about persistence and confidence when he just leaned over and kissed me, soft, tentative, like he was asking permission. And instead of stopping him, I kissed him back. After that, everything accelerated. Late office sessions became opportunities for more than work. Austin would book conference rooms for project meetings that were really just time for us to be alone. I started scheduling client dinners that were actually dates, using company credit for nice restaurants where we could talk without worrying about running into colleagues. The thrill of having this secret, this exciting thing that belonged just to me, felt intoxicating. Dylan remained completely clueless, which honestly made me feel both guilty and superior. He trusted me so completely that he never questioned my late nights or weekend work sessions. When I came home energized and happy, he assumed it was professional satisfaction. When I was distracted during our conversations, he figured I was processing complex project details. His absolute faith in me made everything easier and also made me realize how predictable our marriage had become. Austin, meanwhile, was like dating someone completely new. He had this hunger for experience, for learning about fine dining and cultural events and all the sophisticated things I could introduce him to. Taking him to the art museum or that expensive Creole place Dylan and I used to frequent felt like showing off a world he'd never seen. He was grateful in a way Dylan hadn't been for years, appreciative of every experience I shared with him. The physical chemistry was incredible, too. Austin had this enthusiasm that made me feel desired in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Where Dylan and I had settled into comfortable routines, Austin made everything feel urgent and new. Hotel rooms during business trips that were really just excuses to spend uninterrupted time together. Quick encounters in empty conference rooms when the office was quiet. The risk of getting caught only made everything more exciting. I got careless because I felt so confident about managing the situation. Dylan trusted me. Austin was discreet. And I was smart enough to keep everything compartmentalized. My work performance actually improved because I was motivated and energized. The partners noticed my increased engagement and started giving me more high-profile assignments. Everything in my life seemed to be clicking into place. The Thursday that ruined everything started normally enough. Austin and I had planned to work late on the Henderson revisions, and I'd already told Dylan not to expect me for dinner. But around 4, Austin texted suggesting we order food to my office and really focus on getting the drawings perfect. I was excited about having the evening alone with him. So when Dylan texted asking about stopping by with coffee, I just sent back a thumbs up and told him I was too busy with the deadline. When Dylan showed up anyway around 6:30, I was sitting on Austin's lap at my desk, supposedly reviewing blueprints, but really just enjoying being close to him. The door was closed, but not locked, and Dylan walked right in, like he always did. The look on his face when he saw us, Austin scrambling to stand up, me trying to smooth my skirt back down, both of us clearly guilty as hell, was like watching someone's world collapse in real time. "What the hell is this?" Dylan said, his voice completely flat. Austin started stammering some explanation about project deadlines and working late, but Dylan wasn't even looking at him. His eyes were locked on mine, and I could see him processing everything. The closed door, our positions, the obvious intimacy of the situation. "Dylan, let me explain." I started, but he held up his hand. Just don't." He set the coffee cups he'd brought on my desk, looked at Austin like he was memorizing his face, then walked out without another word. I was panicking. Not about losing Dylan exactly, but about the professional implications. If this got around the office, it could destroy everything I'd worked for. Austin could lose his job before his career even started. The partners would see me as someone who couldn't maintain appropriate boundaries with junior staff. Everything I'd built could crumble because of one careless moment. I tried calling Dylan immediately, but he didn't answer. I texted him repeatedly that evening, begging him to come home so we could talk like adults. "Please don't say anything to anyone. This doesn't have to ruin everything we've built together. We can work through this if you'll just give me a chance to explain." But Dylan didn't come home that night, or the next. When I finally reached him by calling his work phone, his voice was completely cold. "I need time to process this. Amber, don't contact me for a while." The waiting was torture. I had no idea what he was thinking, whether he'd told anyone, what he planned to do next. Austin was freaking out about his job security, and I was trying to manage both his anxiety and my own, while maintaining professional composure at work. The partners didn't seem to know anything yet. but I felt like everyone was watching me, looking for signs of drama. A week later, I made the stupidest decision possible. Austin and I had been texting about needing to discuss our situation, and I suggested meeting at that Creole restaurant where Dylan and I used to go. It felt like reclaiming territory, proving that I wasn't going to let fear control my choices. We were sitting in our usual booth, Austin's hand covering mine on the table, when I looked up and saw Dylan standing by the hostess station. He walked over to our table with this calm expression that was somehow more terrifying than if he'd been screaming. "So this is what you're doing now," he said, looking between Austin and me. Taking him to our place, Austin started to stand up, probably thinking he should leave. But Dylan shook his head. "Don't get up on my account." "I just wanted to see for myself." He looked directly at me then, and his voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear it. "I really thought I knew you." Then he left, and I realized I just made everything infinitely worse. Using our special restaurant for an affair date was cruel, in a way I hadn't fully considered. Dylan and I had celebrated our engagement there, our first anniversary, every major milestone in our relationship. Bringing Austin there was like throwing all of that history back in Dylan's face. After the restaurant incident, Dylan went completely silent. He wouldn't answer my calls, respond to texts, or come home to talk. I started panicking for real because I had no idea what he was planning. Was he talking to lawyers? Had he told his family? Were divorce papers coming? The uncertainty was driving me insane, especially since I had no control over the situation anymore. 2 weeks later, Dave Martinez, who'd just retired as a project manager, asked me to coffee. I figured he wanted to discuss some transition details, but instead he gave me the most humiliating conversation of my professional life. "The partners know about you and Austin," he said without preamble. "They've known for months. They were hoping you'd handle it discreetly. But now that your husband's involved, they're concerned about potential complications." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean they knew?" Dave looked almost sympathetic. "Amber, you weren't as subtle as you thought. Late nights, closed doors, the way you two looked at each other during meetings. Plus, Austin has a history of getting involved with female colleagues. The partners decided to let it play out as long as it didn't affect work quality or create office drama. Learning that I'd been managed like a problem employee while thinking I was being clever was mortifying. Everyone had been watching my affair unfold, making decisions about how to handle me, treating me like some kind of liability instead of the senior associate I'd worked so hard to become. "There's something else," Dave continued. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened at the firm. Partner Stevens had a thing with that junior designer a few years back. The difference is his wife never found out, so it stayed contained. I realized then that I wasn't special or unique. I was just another cliché. Another senior employee who couldn't keep her personal life from bleeding into professional spaces. The partners saw me as predictable, manageable, just another situation to monitor and control. Meanwhile, Dylan was apparently thriving without me, through mutual friends. I heard he'd started going to therapy, joined a gym, reconnected with old friends who'd never particularly liked me anyway. Instead of falling apart like I'd expected, he seemed to be using our separation as motivation for self-improvement. The few times I saw him picking up clothes from the house, he looked better than he had in years. More confident, more focused, like he'd remembered who he was before our marriage. His transformation was honestly insulting. I'd expected him to be devastated, to come crawling back begging for reconciliation. Instead, he was acting like losing me had freed him to become a better version of himself. His friends were probably filling his head with bullshit about how he deserved better and how I'd never appreciated him. The same friends who'd always been intimidated by my success and probably celebrated when they heard about our problems. 3 months after the restaurant incident, Dylan finally agreed to meet me for coffee. I thought maybe we could start working toward rebuilding what we'd had. But the man who showed up was like a stranger wearing my husband's face. He'd lost weight, updated his wardrobe, carried himself with this new confidence that was honestly attractive and infuriating at the same time. "I want a divorce," he said before I could even start my prepared speech about counseling and second chances. "I've already talked to a lawyer." "Dylan, please, we can work through this. What Austin and I had, it didn't mean anything real. You're my husband. We took vows." He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Amber, this isn't about Austin. This is about you lying to me for months, gaslighting me when I had legitimate concerns, and then having the nerve to take him to our restaurant. You didn't just cheat. You systematically destroyed every bit of trust between us." I tried explaining that the affair was just a temporary distraction, that I'd been under so much pressure at work, and Austin had been available when I needed someone to understand my professional challenges. But Dylan wasn't buying any of it. "You made me feel crazy for months," he said. Every time I had a gut feeling something was wrong, you'd turn it around and make me question myself. You'd ask why I was so insecure, whether I trusted you, all while you were effing around with some kid at your office. The language shocked me. Dylan never swore, never raised his voice, never showed this kind of controlled anger. Therapy had apparently taught him to express himself in ways that were actually more devastating than yelling would have been. "I found the emails, by the way," he continued. "The hotel receipts, the restaurant charges, everything. You weren't nearly as careful as you thought you were." That's when I realized he'd been investigating our entire relationship, going through financial records and digital communications like some kind of detective. The methodical way he documented everything felt like a violation, even though I was the one who'd been lying. "I also know the partners at your firm were aware of the affair," Dylan said. "Dave Martinez told me when I called to ask about the company credit card charges. Apparently everyone knew except me." The humiliation of being the last person to know that other people knew was almost unbearable. I'd thought I was managing a sophisticated secret. But really, I'd been the subject of office gossip and partner meetings about how to handle my unprofessional behavior. Right now, I'm knee-deep in divorce proceedings, and Dylan's lawyer is a shark who's determined to make me pay for every lie I told. They're demanding full financial disclosure, including explanations for every business dinner and hotel charge from the past year. My own lawyer keeps telling me to be reasonable and accept Dylan's terms. But I can't understand why I should be punished so severely for what amounts to a temporary lapse in judgment. The house feels enormous and empty without Dylan's presence. No morning coffee routine. No surprise lunch deliveries. No one asking about my day or bringing me little gifts for no reason. I keep expecting him to call or text to show some sign that he misses what we had together. But his silence is complete. His therapist has probably convinced him that cutting contact is healthy or some other psychological bullshit. Austin and I tried to keep seeing each other after everything exploded, but the thrill was gone once it wasn't secret anymore. Plus, he was paranoid about his job security and kept pressuring me to figure out whether the partners were planning to fire him. The dynamic that had felt so exciting when it was forbidden just felt complicated and messy once it was out in the open. Eventually, Austin transferred to another firm, claiming he needed a fresh start, but really just abandoning me to deal with the professional fallout alone. So much for all that gratitude and appreciation he'd shown when I was mentoring him and opening doors for his career. Typical behavior from someone who'd never learned how to handle complex adult situations. The divorce should be final in a few months, and Dylan's already talking about selling the house and splitting everything down the middle. He's being completely unreasonable about sentimental items, acting like I don't deserve to keep things we bought together just because I made some mistakes. His whole attitude is like he's erasing our entire relationship, instead of remembering the good years we had before everything got complicated. What really pisses me off is how everyone's acting like I'm some kind of monster for having normal human needs that weren't being met in my marriage. Dylan and I had gotten comfortable, predictable, boring. Austin represented excitement and appreciation and intellectual connection that I'd been missing. People have affairs all the time. It doesn't have to mean the end of everything if both parties are willing to be mature about rebuilding trust. But Dylan's being completely dramatic about the whole situation, acting like I committed some unforgivable sin instead of just getting temporarily distracted by someone who made me feel valued. His friends and family are probably reinforcing this victim narrative, telling him he's better off without me, when really we could have worked through this if he'd been willing to put in the effort. The worst part is how this has affected my professional reputation. The partners are treating me differently now, giving me smaller projects and excluding me from major client meetings. Austin's replacement is some older guy who shows no interest in learning from my expertise. So I've lost that mentoring relationship that was actually beneficial for my career development. Everything I worked for is being undermined because people can't separate personal drama from professional competence. I've tried reaching out to Dylan a few times since our coffee meeting, sending emails about how we could try counseling or take a break to work on ourselves before making permanent decisions. But he's not responding to any overtures about reconciliation. His lawyer just sends back formal communications about asset division and timeline requirements, like our marriage was a business transaction instead of a relationship between two people who loved each other. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Dylan had never walked into my office that Thursday. If Austin and I had been more careful about maintaining discretion, we could have kept our professional relationship separate from personal complications. And Dylan would never have been hurt by knowledge he didn't need to have. The whole situation spiraled out of control because of bad timing and poor communication. Not because anyone was fundamentally wrong about their needs or choices, but that's not how Dylan sees it. And apparently it's not how anyone else sees it either. I'm being painted as the villain in a story where I was just trying to balance competing priorities and maintain my professional development while dealing with a marriage that had lost its spark. The fact that no one seems to understand the complexity of my situation just proves how immature and judgmental people can be about relationships that don't fit their narrow expectations. The house sale is scheduled for next month, and then I'll have to find somewhere new to live and start rebuilding my life from scratch. Dylan gets to play the wounded hero who's bravely starting over, while I'm left dealing with the professional and personal consequences of choices that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time. It's honestly unfair how much I'm being punished for what should have been a private matter between consenting adults. At least I still have my career, even if it's been damaged by all this drama. The Morrison Project won a design award, which proves my professional abilities weren't affected by personal complications. Maybe once the divorce is final and people move on to gossiping about someone else's problems, I can rebuild my reputation and get back on track for that senior associate promotion I was working toward before everything got so effing complicated.